Good afternoon, this is Ralph Brandt, and welcome to From the Fireside. I was cleaning up some files on my computer and found this. I wrote this for a web page I had up on a site called GeoCities in the mid-1990s. It was called Common Sense in York, PA. This article is a glimpse of a place called Boiling Springs and the inhabitants and those who went to school there called the Bubblers. It's entitled, Bubblers, What Are They? Bubblers were a strange lot. They went to a school that at a time, and even now, was unlike the ones around them. When I attended in 1949 through 1961, the school had 1,200 through 1,500 students in 12 and later 13 grades. The building was overcrowded for quite a few of my years there. It almost became a fact of life to be overcrowded. My class was 103 in the first grade, 64 of us graduated. The rate of graduation was neither impressive or bad for its time. The class of 1961 was a larger class than of 1960. There was a lot of growth in the early 50s, but this slowed in the later years. The school was smaller in graduating class than most of the neighboring schools, but rarely had losing seasons in sports under Coach Purcell B. Ecker. Its band was frequently distinguished in the 1950s under Lynn G. Brenneman. Mrs. Alice Malone in the Home Economics Department had the distinction of having the National Cherry Pie Baking Contest champion, Leah Whitmer, come from her class in 1953. In succeeding years, the school had several district and state champions in the cherry pie and apple dessert contests. My older sisters, June Showers, 54, and Joan McNew, 55, were among these winners. There are many long-term teachers there. Doc Craig White in physics and chemistry, Miss Lewis and Carl Guerriero in math, Miss Sally Briner in social studies, Miss Hackman in English, and Mr. Rhodes in earth science, Mr. William Hartman in shop, and Mr. Whitcomb in bio and driver training. Some shorter-term ones remain in my memory because they made an impact. Mrs. Love, Mrs. Maris, Mrs. Birch, and Shutter are among the list. The school was actually called the South Middleton Township Consolidated School. I don't know when the South Middleton Township Consolidated School came into being, but I do know that my dad, Ralph R. Brandt, started his schooling in a one-room school along Route 94, about a mile north of Mount Victory Church, on the corner of 94 and what is still called School Road. He would have started there in the 1918-1919 school year. He would have graduated in the spring of 1930, but quit school late in his senior year because of family finances. I know that during his time in school, the school at Boiling Springs was built. I somehow remember the year on the cornerstone being 1928. I believe this building was built in two sections, the eastern end first in 28, then the western portion possibly 10 years later. It was at least 10 years old in 1949. The original building consisted of only about 30 classrooms, including labs and the band/music room. The auditorium was located over the gymnasium near the southeast corner of the school, but the audience portion of it consisted of several classrooms that could be divided by folding doors. The stage also doubled at times as a small classroom. The cafeteria had food service space only. Elementary school students returned to their classrooms to eat. The high school students ate on tables that were set up in the halls during the lunchtime. The senior high students were allowed to go to the combo across the street to eat, as this helped alleviate space shortage. I am not sure of the location of the library at that time. My sister Joan and I were discussing this one evening recently, and I asked if the library was behind the stage. That has been affirmed. In addition, she confirmed that the stage was used as a classroom. Mr. Orris's math classes were frequently held there. In 1949, when I was a first grader, this building housed grades 1 through 12. The kindergarten did not exist. It began 2 years later, in 1951. My younger sister was in the first class to attend kindergarten. This was held for several years in the back room of the Combo restaurant across the street. In 1948, the school board realized that the building was inadequate and started construction of what was known then as the 1949 wing. It contained about 12 classrooms, a small library. My class moved during the year from a below grade level room in the old building to the 49 wing. During these years, the school had an active parents group. There was a regular 2 to 3 evening event held at the school called the Bazaar and Carnival. This event found each classroom in the elementary school doing some event for the parents to see. The events were less than 20 minutes and ran several times a night, so parents could see not only what their children did, but what other rooms were doing. The high school did other events in the auditorium, and food was sold in various areas. The money raised went for books in the library. The parents had the idea that some money could be raised for school without raising taxes. This practice ended sometime after my year in 4th grade. During the summer, a band fair was held to raise money for the band. Also, the band was a year-round organization. We marched and played for firemen's fairs to provide money for uniforms and instruments. The school board did provide support, but generally this was limited to space and the director. In 1954, there was an expansion again, and a building was added that provided for a full library, adequate shops, better labs, a good music room. The old band room became the physics and chemistry lab. The risers were removed from about 3/4 of the room for the lab. The lecture seating was on the remaining risers at one end of the room, a really good idea. The new building had a new gymnasium, albeit the space was also the auditorium with a stage at one end and movable basketball nets. With the opening of the 54 wing, the old auditorium was renovated and became the kindergarten. The old sunken gymnasium was filled in and became a multi-purpose room. This would only last until a space crunch about 1959 caused it to be partitioned off into 4 classrooms. I took driver education in a room created by 1/4 of this room. The old cafeteria became a couple of classrooms. For the first time, the students ate in the cafeteria. My sister June Brandt Showers graduated in 1954. At her graduation, a man, name unknown, talked about atomic energy and discussed one of the atomic bomb tests that he had seen. Just after he finished his talk, a photographer stepped up to take a picture. I'm not sure exactly what happened here, but the flashbulb, one of the old number 5s for those who know photo history, ejected upon firing and exploded on the floor. Many dived for the floor. The old building was raised some years ago. I have no idea how much of it stands yet. I am sure that the 28 and 49 wings are gone. It was solidly built and probably was a challenge to demolish. Someday I will have to go back and look, but the era of the Consolidated school is gone. South Middleton Township schools now have buildings scattered hither and yon. Every time you go over a hill in the township, you find a school. This fragmentation has done nothing but increase costs. Why do these things happen? Because school administrators help decide how to build buildings, and they benefit from having more junior administrators to administrate, because the more there are, the higher their salaries, and the more buildings, the more junior administrators. It is self-serving. The new high school is on a hill behind the old school, located in an area so rife with sinkholes that it appalled me when I learned a school was being built there. Hopefully, it will not someday sink into the ground. That was part 1 about the school. This is part 2, which is talking about Boiling Springs itself and brings in some side issues. Named for the boiling lake, it is located in Pennsylvania near Carlisle. Allenbury Playhouse is also near the town. The lake is cold, normal stream water temperature, but it appears to boil because of the springs that feed it from under its bed. One area near the edge of the lake nearest to the town bubbles more profoundly than others. The water only comes up a few inches above the lake's surface. It is said that in years past the water came to a height of several feet. The area was inhabited by Indians. Local lore tells us that the caves in the limestone area running from Boiling Springs to Carlisle and Shippensburg was so extensive and so well known to the Indians that they could travel from Boiling Springs to Shippensburg without coming out of the ground. That is about 25 miles. I was a member of the Shippensburg State College Grotto Club in 1964-65 and spent a lot of times in the caves in the area. Cleversburg Sink, Nicewander, Hershey, Coy, just to mention a few, are located as far west as St. Thomas. There are probably nearly 100 of them. I know the caves. I doubt the statement that they could go from Boiling Springs to Shippensburg without coming out of the ground. But I do not doubt that the Indians could traverse so much of the distance underground that it would have been easy to travel the route without being seen. The area is steeped in Revolutionary War history. There was an ironworks there about the time of the Revolution. The Aggie Cemetery on the hill just out of town towards Allenbury dates to the Revolutionary War. Iron was dug there as well as smelted during the Revolution, but in the 1940s during World War II, there was intense interest in a deposit of manganese in the same area. Test holes were drilled and the deposit mapped. The end of the war came before the deposit was actually tapped. I would guess that someday the deposit will become economically feasible to mine. But for now, there are only a few signs of that activity. My college geology class explored this area in 1963 and found evidence of both the iron mining and manganese exploration. Today, an anti-aircraft weapon sits near the lake, next to a clock tower that shows the names of those from this little community that gave their lives for freedom. Allenbury Playhouse is about 2 miles from the town. Well-knowns have made appearances there before and after they were well known. But the town is more than that. It has some firsts. The first dial telephone exchange in the area was sited there by United Telephone. The exchange was built when the phone company still used 2 letters and 5 numbers for a phone number. The letters for Boiling Springs was CL, Clinton. I have tried to come up with the year. It had to be in the mid-50s, after 54, because the training was done in the gymnasium auditorium of the 54 edition. United Telephone brought in a large display with a dial and noisemakers that made dial tone and busy tone and displayed it for the student body in small groups. What an idea. They put trainers in over half of the households in the area with a couple of showings. How much did this save the phone company in problems? I can only guess, but when they brought it to Mount Holly Springs, exchange name Hunter, about 3 years later, they did it again, and my sister and I were trainers on the use of the dial phone in our house. As an aside, the Carlisle exchange was C.H. Chapel. This is Ralph Brandt from the Fireside.